talk a little bit here about vegetable gardening. I think this is the perfect time to talk about vegetable gardening. We had lots of questions, and some of them were multifaceted. So I think me and Megan are going to try to head these questions up for y'all. And of course, we have our other panelists here. Feel free to jump in if y'all have things to add. So we're going to start with the first question here. It says, what home gardening varieties were successful between 1931 and 1940? I know this sounds weird, but it's going to make more sense. There's a 100-year drought cycle. The last time it lasted 10 years. If there were any varieties back then that were particularly well adapted, I'd like to know what they are and to find them and get the seeds. And so I thought this was an interesting question, and unfortunately I don't have a direct answer for you, but one of our colleagues, Dr. Andrea Ludwig, had looked over these questions, and she sent me a link. She was doing some research about native plant populations and how they are adapting to their sites over time, and it was really interesting. She sent me a link for it, and I will post that in the chat so that those who are interested in that can kind of look that up and get a little familiar with it. We just don't have, like university data that goes back that far in time. I don't even think there was anyone who was tracking, like home garden type varieties then. So we don't have a straightforward answer, but do have some interesting information that I feel that people might find.
Hey, Celeste, look at the AAS winners from the 30s. So
All-American Selection.
All-American Selection started in the early 1930s, and go back and look at a lot of those cultivars, and that would be the ones that were successful in the U.S. at that time. Finding those selections are going to be a little challenging, but some of them will include things like Clemson, spineless okra, and things that are still available today.
Some of those
you can search by year on those.
Right. Some of those that we called like our tried and true, things that we like regularly depend on still in the garden. So good point. Good point. All right. So the next one here says, I am a beginner vegetable gardener and I am discouraged. This particular gardener attempted to plant a number of different crops this season: corn, cabbage, potatoes, peppers, cucumbers. You get where I'm going with this. They jumped all in, which is excellent. I admire that. However, they have not had great success with any of their crops. They and they're just looking for some general guidance on how they may be more prepared for next year to have a little more success. They were concerned that they didn't use compost and wondered if that's what caused everything to die, which I think we're going to address, and the issue of a fertilizer. They did say they used fertilizer, but we don't know what kind or how much. So Megan, do you kind of want to like start us in and just kind of like work us through some of the things?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I wish I could just hug this person and say, don't be discouraged right now, because this is a hard year. Like if you're in my region, it's drought and it's heat, and not very much has just been great for gardening for seasoned and beginners. So don't be discouraged. It's okay. But the first thing that kind of comes to mind for me is, okay, do we have a soil test? Do we know what's going on in our soil? I know that's the classic extension answer, but that really is foundational to know. That's going to be important for us to know. Do we have that test? Because then we can know what amounts of fertilizer and how much we need in our soil. So make sure we know that. She mentioned compost and fertilizer. And so I kind of wanted just to take a minute and break that down. And I think probably Melody / any one of y'all can jump in, but compost is often confused with fertilizer, and that may not be this person. That may not be the person who submitted this, but I just wanted to address it. But compost is helping us to add organic matter into the soil, which does some awesome things, which helps with water holding capacity and water infiltration, nutrients, and all that great stuff. Soil compaction. So right now, maybe that would have been a benefit to have depending on your soil type if you didn't add that in, but I would be really hard pressed to think that's the only reason that the garden just didn't do well. But understand your soil type, and if it's needed, certainly add that in. Cover crops would be great too. That's something we could probably get ready to do now, if you needed to add some organic matter into your soil. So that's something to consider. But I wouldn't think that that would be the main reason why the garden didn't do well. But now in fertilizer, it's important, again, back to that soil test. We want to know what we need, and then we can feed our soil sufficiently. So if we over fertilize, we can be causing some issues too. So we want to make sure we have that soil test. I am going to drop a few publications when I'm, here in just a minute, that kind of hit all of these points. So we have a really good one on fertilizer and how much and when, because, we want to fertilize our tomatoes and peppers at a certain time, to be effective. So I'll drop that in the chat box so you can kind of refer to that schedule. And again, water and heat, like it's just been a really hard time. Like it's been hard. My poor tomatoes are just now starting to do something. So they've been scorched, they're trying. But if we're not, we're not watering at the right times too. So if we're watering in the middle of the day, well, they're not really going to be able to utilize all of that because it's just going to be evaporated with the heat that we've had. But on the flip side, if we're watering way too much, we could also be drowning them. I think she mentioned wilting as one of the things that she had. So that could be something that we're seeing. So I would certainly consider some irrigation if you don't already have that. That's really going to help, especially with what we've been going through with this heat wave and drought, to make sure they're getting a consistent amount of water. In the early morning and the evening are usually going to be your best times to water.
Megan, I'll throw in, since I've been getting so many questions that are dealing with this heat and these temperatures that we've been having. Thankfully, the rain has moved in this past week. It's raining here this morning, yay! But we've really been struggling with drought and heat stress on our plants, and lots of wilting questions. So a few, there are other things that can cause wilting in the garden other than just lack of water. We could or excess water. Could be diseases. It could be insect feeding, diseases vectored by insects. So a easy way to determine, help to eliminate some of those would be, if you see wilting, go out and water the plant. And if it recovers during the cool parts of the day, in the morning when you go back out, or later in the evening, and you see that plant has revived, that could be an indication that maybe, number one, they did need some extra water, or maybe they're like plants that have really big leaves just lose moisture, through respiration and evaporation off of their leaf surface. So sometimes they're losing moisture more quickly than they can take it up through the roots. So as long as those plants are recovering, that tells you that it has something to do with moisture related. If it doesn't, then you need to look a little deeper into like disease and insect issues. So just thought I'd throw that one in there.
Yeah, that's a good way to measure that, if it's water or something else. And just speaking of bugs, I've seen a lot more insect feeding. The weather has been real conducive for lots of things. So that certainly could be bacterial, fungal, viral, insect. And that's one thing you probably already know that with the extension, and we can kind of help you flesh those things out. But we need to know, like, if you got good photos, or if you got the actual plant that's, if something's going on with it, bring that with the roots and all that into us. We can kind of help identify. And if not, we've got a lab that can help us take it further. So keep that in mind. We can kind of help you get that figured out if it's bacterial, fungal, and whatnot. So I think that answered.
Yeah, I think you covered that really well. I think we just kind of hit on some of the high points, and so that's going to give a lot of guidance for folks who are beginners, and try to help them get started on a better foot, whether they're getting ready to install a fall garden or for next year. Before we move on from that, and this was not in our list of pre-submitted questions, but Melody, would you mind talking just briefly a minute or two about some options for cover crops, because we are not going to have another office hours, I don't think, before it would be like the ideal time to plant like some cover crops in vegetable type garden areas.
Do we have an extra hour?
Oh. I know. What are just some suggestions, like a few types of suggestions? Like in my head, I'm thinking, well, they probably still have time to do buckwheat, right? That's like a 60-day turnaround.
It's actually like a 40-day. Yeah.
Oh, good.
So, if they're wanting to just kind of keep the weeds down for the summer, yeah. But if you are not going to grow a fall crop, then you can go in mid-September and and you got multiple options, I'll go through and dig out my little chart here in a minute so y'all can see that. But again, on my farm visit this morning, this is fresh on my mind. Remember, if you have a weed seed bank established in your garden area, rye is a perfect tool to be able to use because it's got that allelopathic effect. So come springtime, it's going to help prevent germination of certain weed species. If nutrition is a problem, then of course you've got crimson clover or even vetch, as long as you're turning that in, because we know vetch can spread. But as long as you're managing that, that can be a good tool for nitrogen fixation. Also wheat, just to have something on that garden. We don't want to ever see just bare ground, even through those winter months. So make sure that you get something out there. But again, you got to have the tools necessary. If you're in ground in a garden, tilling this in the spring, that's a great option. You can even mix all four of those I just talked about. Some people will even go in this time of year and sow oats. If they're sowing a fall garden, to kind of use that also helps suppress weed seeds. But again, I'm going to put a chart in there, or did you just do that for me, Seth? Thank you very much. So you can see that link there, but make sure you just have something on your ground. And even if you have raised beds, don't leave it fallow, continue to build that soil.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I think that we're going to touch on one more question in fruit and veggies before we move on. But we had a question here about, is it best to start vegetable seeds indoors or outdoors, which we can talk about briefly. And then also, is it too late to start over in the garden? So I feel like this is another one of those folks who maybe didn't have as great success as they generally have with their warm season gardens. And I will say, no, it is not too late to start over. It is too late to start over with warm season crops. But one of the terms that I always like to tell my garden folks around here is fall gardening in the South starts in the summer. If you wait until fall to start your fall cool season crops, you're too late. You've missed the window. So right now is really the time that we need to be thinking about those cool season crops that we want to include in our garden. Go ahead, those warm season things that are playing out or that are getting real diseasey or insect infested, let's go ahead and pull those out and just replace them with the cool season. And I'm going to post a link to a publication. It's one of my favorites. I feel like I use it for so many things. It's the Tennessee Vegetable Garden Planting, Plant Preparation, and Planting. And it has an awesome chart on the very last page that outlines nearly all of the different vegetable crops that we would grow here in Tennessee, gives recommendation on spring planting dates as well as fall planting dates. And in this same publication, it also indicates which plants perform best if the seeds are started indoors versus direct seeding. So this is going to be like the Bible for everybody who has those questions. Everything's going to be answered right there in that publication. So definitely take a look at it, and no, it's not too late to get started. This is the perfect time to get our cool season gardens started for the year.